IB Nation Sports Talk up and rolling on a Tuesday. Glad to have you with us here today, along with Jesse Stiers. I'm Sean Stiers. Yes, we are a little bit tardy getting our class started today, and this is the reason why. As Salty says, Brian's class is still in session, and Brian kind of gave us a heads up today. Hey, we might be running a little bit long, so you might want to wait a little bit to start things up. And so we waited a good 5-6 minutes and figured we'd just go ahead and hit the old live button and get going here today. So here we are. How are you?
It's Tuesday. It's cold and rainy here again today, but got in a nice little workout this morning. I was telling you about my tax fiasco, but other than that, I'm doing pretty solid.
Unexpectedly cold this morning, cold and rainy here in South Bend today. It was nasty. Again, because we had like a beautiful day yesterday. Every time around here, you think you're going to have a great day. The next day just follows it up with something else. We've experienced most of the seasons within the last 3 days here, but weather is weather. Let's talk a little football. We talked quarterbacks yesterday, and we're going to come back to the quarterbacks in rapid fire today. We got plenty of quarterback talk that we'll have for you in rapid fire, but we talked to Marcus Freeman after Saturday's blue gold game, and we've got a few comments to hear from Marcus Freeman today that I thought would be interesting, since we didn't get to him yesterday, since we did spend so much time talking about the quarterback. So this is a very unique spring. It's the first time that I can remember where they still have some practices to go after playing the blue gold game. And here's Marcus Freeman talking about what those few practices this week or whenever they happen to finish them up might look like.
The spring game fell where it fell. Usually it's obviously the end of spring, but the reason why it was earlier is just because of pushing the start of spring back with the length of the season. But we'll go and we'll look. I have some ideas of what I want to see these next 2 to 3 practices, talk with the coaches about what else we want to see. But a lot of it is going to be some play it situations, 2-minute situations where, you got to make your guys think and execute, but also there's going to be great teaching opportunities from those situations in practice.
And I guess it makes sense that you push the start of spring back and they finished it earlier than usual. This weekend is Easter, which I hadn't thought about when we were talking about, well, why are you finishing so early? Why not just play, so they're not going to play the blue gold game during Easter weekend. I'm guessing they probably want to avoid the NFL draft next week as well. There were a couple years fairly recently that, they played the blue gold game the same weekend as the NFL draft. And there's just a lot going on when that happens, both from a Notre Dame perspective, from a media perspective, trying to get everything covered. So I guess, it makes sense that you have kind of this odd spring. But Jesse did mention 2-minute situations. So what, if 2-minute situations are going to be one of the focus, I guess what would you like to see potentially there? What would you think that they might do there?
Yeah, I think in the 2-minute situation, first of all, you want to do the install and make sure all the quarterbacks are kind of comfortable, with the cadence and the motions that come along with the 2-minute drill. It's not something that I'd be super critical of at the end of the day, because it is still spring practice and you still are, installing it for a group of quarterbacks with relatively, little experience. And honestly, I would imagine someone like Steve Angeli would do the best in the 2-minute drill, just considering, his experience. And then obviously he kind of came in against Penn State in a 2-minute drill type situation. So really, I think what I would want to see is just people like Minchey and Carr getting their feet wet, understanding kind of the rhythm of the 2-minute drill. I think that's the main thing about the 2-minute drill is the rhythm of it, knowing how to get your team lined up, how to get the play called, essentially moving the ball downfield, knowing when to, maybe spike it or throw the ball out of bounds so you can stop the clock and reset. So I would just want to see them build some sort of comfortable rhythm that allows the offense to move downfield and hopefully get some points, get in at least field goal range.
And I think it makes sense as well as you're evaluating these quarterbacks. That's one of the things that you need to compare them against each other with is a 2-minute drill situation. How does he run it? And it's not like you're like how you run a 2-minute drill isn't going to make or break a quarterback competition the last week of spring, but at the same time, just those points that you're talking about, you need something to compare them to. You need to have kind of some of that on film so that you go into fall training camp with that, so that the next time you get there, that's something that they have already done. And again, I just think it's important that they get that experience and you're able to compare them against each other. So it makes a lot of sense that maybe this would be the time to do that. And I was trying to think, I don't know, like any other priorities you can think of at this point, because again, it's essentially last sort of lingering practices, final 3 practices of the spring.
Yeah, I think you could just kind of get into, maybe some more competitive periods. 2-minute drill defensively. You can maybe start looking at putting in some different blitz packages, that sort of stuff. But I think the main thing over the last 2 to 3 practices is to make sure that there is a great understanding of the basics or the fundamentals, and then kind of working into more of the competitive stuff, the 2-minute drills, the offensive linemen, maybe defense of linemen one-on-ones, putting in some blitz packages as a defense. Maybe, you're getting into multiple looks on defense, or playing, half field coverage. One half of the defense is playing, one sort of coverage. The other half of the defense is playing another type of coverage. Just more nuanced stuff to maybe get ahead of the fall to a degree, right? So like when you get to fall, you really hit the ground running. You don't feel like you're behind by any means. And so really, I think the last 2 to 3 practices would be, putting a little bit more of the non-basic stuff, and then getting ahead as much as possible, for fall camp at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think probably also just a good opportunity to continue to see some of these younger guys and give them, some looks, kind of some final impressions, both younger guys and, like some of these walk-on type guys who you don't know what the future for some of these guys is going to be, like give them some final opportunities, both, maybe to be a Notre Dame football player, but also, to show what they can do. Because again, they're not going to have to make, and it's still nothing official yet, but they wouldn't have to make a decision on what a 105-man roster would look like until right before the first game. So, I mean, you can bring those guys into fall training camp with you. Obviously, in terms of guys who would want to transfer, that's where it would work against them. But you could bring them in, and if, obviously, if they don't end up staying on the team, then they can, they'll still be able to go to Notre Dame and all that kind of stuff. But spring is a good opportunity to continue, I think, to give those guys kind of some final looks, final reps, and all those kind of things as they get ready for the summer, which, I mean, it's basically it's the middle of April right now. And so roughly 2 months from now, they'll be starting their summer workouts and going to summer school and doing all that stuff after they, take finals next month and take a break for a few weeks to get away. Because when you think about it, this group, guys who have been with the team since last summer, basically, there's not been much break. Like they didn't have just a bowl game and then you get to go home for a couple of weeks and, be with the family and all that kind of stuff. These guys have been pretty much here since last summer because of the fact that, they did, remember, they were adjusting final exams and all that kind of stuff for the home playoff game against Indiana. And then by the time the national championship game rolled around, the second semester had already started. So like they didn't get the Christmas break where they got to get away either before or after the bowl games, so these guys have been at it for a long time. It's not like they had more opportunity to get away after the national championship game because they had to get back and get to class right away.
Yeah, this after the spring practice concludes, it'll be kind of their first break dating back to the beginning of fall camp last season. Because like you said, when you go that far into the playoff, you're already into next semester.
Yeah.
And then you get back, and then it's time to go to class. And then shortly after that, you're already back in the weight room doing some sort of, training, weight training, speed training. And then a couple of weeks after that, you're back into spring practice. So it will be a nice deserved break for a lot of guys, and especially the guys who are, I don't think there's a ton of injuries out there, but everyone's got some nagging pains and groans and stuff. So I think it'll be nice for some of those guys to fully recover.
I think Jason's at least joking a little bit, but he says, "Stop crying, they get paid now." Remember, like, there's a pretty wide scale. It's like you've got elite paychecks, and you've got middle class paychecks, and you've got living paycheck to paycheck paychecks. Just like everybody else out in the world. They're not all getting paid the same thing. And he did say that he is joking. So, but yeah, I mean, again, it's like, I think just from a mental refresh, reset, and all that kind of stuff, they need some of that as well. Steven had a couple transfer portal questions, and that takes me right into this next soundbite for Marcus Freeman, because the portal does open up Wednesday. It's going to be open from April 16th through the 25th of this month.
Yeah, I mean, we spend time every day together, and again, if a guy on our current roster is interested in getting in the portal, I'm sure we'll have those conversations, and at the end of the day, figure out what's best for them, for us. And the same thing is, again, we're not actively seeking to add to our roster. We're really happy with what we got. If something comes to our attention and we see adds value to our roster and our program, then we have to have a conversation about it. But there's nothing intentional right now about these upcoming weeks. We're going to practice, we're going to be together, we're going to work, and if somebody decides to go into the portal, then we'll adapt and adjust.
Did think it's interesting. He said we're not actively pursuing anyone in the portal, and like that seems to be kind of where he is, because like if they lose guys at certain positions to the transfer portal, maybe you have to adjust to it, like he's talking about. Do you, like, as you sit here right now from a Notre Dame perspective, do you see any reason to feel nervous about the portal opening up this week?
No, I don't see any, or I don't have any reason to be nervous about the portal opening this week. I think that all of the positions and players that we are worried about or care about have an understanding of where they stand, on the roster, where their playing time is at, and that sort of thing. And so I think that really what you would see in the transfer portal is probably some trimming of the fat, guys who understand that they're probably buried on the depth chart and wouldn't have, as great of an opportunity to see some playing time this upcoming season. I don't forecast, someone big, as in starter or too deep, hit the portal and leave Notre Dame. I think that's when you would ultimately start to feel a little bit nervous. But I really feel like Marcus Freeman has done a great job of establishing the culture at Notre Dame, being transparent with the players. Everyone kind of knows or has a good idea of where they're at. And the thing is, too, is Notre Dame is no longer kind of, the ones are it, and that's really it in terms of who's playing out there. I think there's a lot of depth across a lot of positions, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So that helps to keep a lot of guys happy. You're getting them reps at the end of the day. They're getting their opportunities in the game. And so I think that lends for not as many players are going to hit the transfer portal this upcoming spring. But I think basically, if I'm interpreting what Marcus Freeman said, is I don't think they anticipate someone major leaving, but if that did happen, then they would probably, reevaluate and see if they could make an addition by subtraction through the
exactly. Because I mean, like you look at the defensive side of the ball, and like has been the case the last few years, they have added some strategic, pieces defensively on the defensive line and in the secondary as well. You could have two guys in the secondary starting, who came from the portal. You could have two guys interior defensive line this time, and no defensive ends that they brought in, who end up starting. And obviously you got some guys, a couple wide receivers on the other side of the ball as well. And I agree with your take on it, because it just feels like if guys hit the portal this spring, it's going to be guys who are probably below the 2 deep, who find themselves buried and who are looking for an opportunity, to go out and play someplace else, potentially right away. It feels like that's the kind of guy, because I was looking through the roster and, it just feels like that's what it would probably be this year. Now, Steven had a couple portal questions and a good one, and I, kind of neglected this part of it when we were talking about the spring date. Do you think it's possible the spring game was also held earlier because of the spring transfer portal window? Now, he specifically says so Angeli can transfer if he wants to. I don't think it was. I don't think they moved up the spring date specifically for Angeli or any other quarterback, but because of when it is, I mean, that could factor in there as well, even though they are practicing this week. So,
yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely strategic to place the actual quote unquote game before the portal opens, because that's for some of these guys, that's the only film that they're going to have out there, besides practice film and a spring game film. Some of these guys don't have actual in-game reps or footage quite yet. And so I think that having the spring game before the portal is a nice gesture towards the players, because then if they do decide to enter, they have at least some sort of tape that they can offer to other teams. So
yes, so it's really counter to like Matt Rule and these other coaches shutting down their spring games, like you're saying, and I don't completely disagree with it, that Marcus Freeman could actually be helping some of these guys lower on the depth chart by the fact that they are televising that game and actually letting some coaches have some eyeballs on them, which I think is honestly the honorable thing to do, especially for veteran type guys.
Yeah. Guys who have been around for a while. I mean, to be 100% honest with you, it would be great for someone like Steve Angeli if he decided to enter the transfer portal, because
Christopher's come around. He swung around to the CJ Carr train yesterday, but that doesn't mean he's not a Steve Angeli fan. And he says, leave Steve Angeli, leave Steve alone. So,
it was really funny. I didn't get to watch too much of the spring game. I caught most of probably the last quarter to maybe 33, a third of the game basically. And I was kind of following some stuff on social media the latter few days. I just thought it was really interesting. Some of these guys who were all, Angeli fans, all of a sudden was no mention of Angeli, but there was, but Kenny Minchey looks really good. And it's right. So we're not even going to mention the other guy in the middle type situation. So long story short, at least Christopher has the stones to say, you know what, CJ Carr was pretty good, but leave my man Steve alone at the end of the day. I just thought that was funny.
Justin ND Sniper says the only position he could see going to the portal is maybe tight end, but it wouldn't be necessary. Now, remember, they are bringing a tight end from Arkansas. Tyrus Washington is going to be here this summer, so they've already added a tight end from the portal there. So you'd have Washington, Eli Reardon, who's had a great spring, Jack Larson, Kevin Bauman. And Bauman is a guy he's been around for a long time, and he's battled some injuries, and he made a couple plays the other day in the spring game. And this kind of takes us into, again, what we were going to talk about next, because tight ends have always been such a big part of the offense, but it's kind of felt like, really, especially since Michael Mayer left a couple of years ago, it's kind of dipped a little bit, taken a back seat, probably, especially last year, even though Mitchell Evans still led the team in receptions last year. But we saw Bauman, Reardon, and Larson combined for 5 catches for 85 yards Saturday. And Marcus Freeman talked about the tight ends afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin's a guy that played a lot of ball for us 2 years ago and has battled some injuries, and, have him back this spring in some type of role has been good. Eli's, we've held him in certain areas of spring ball, but again, he's a guy, what you're going to get out of Eli Reardon, and again, he showed today to do some good things. It was good to see Jack make a huge catch today. Jack and Kevin, but Jack, it was good to see that throw and catch in that critical situation. But I think that group as a whole, Garrity's done some good things. Justin Fisher's done some good things. It's good to see, hey, with the Cooper being down, Eli being limited at times, Kevin had early in spring being limited. guys are stepping up. It's a reflection of the leadership in the room, but also the depth of that room. And so done some really good things. I'm really pleased with that room.
Pleased with the tight end room. And again, they're bringing in Tyrus Washington from Arkansas. He's a guy who's got a couple years, I believe, of eligibility remaining. And I guess my question for the short term is, like, how much do you feel like they need the tight end to be a factor in the offense?
I don't think they need the tight end to be a factor. I think it's an added bonus when you have a dynamic tight end that can work downfield a little bit. But to be 100% honest with you, with Notre Dame's running game, I think the main priority of the tight end is you have to be a really good inline blocker, or if you're even split out or an H-back, you need to be an efficient blocker because of how good that these running backs are. And so, you know, I would say, like, if I'm evaluating these tight ends, I would be more harsh or critical on their run blocking than I would their ability to run routes and catch passes. While it's still, you know, advantageous to have really good dynamic tight ends who can catch the ball and, you know, compress the seam and maybe work that middle of the field type situation. I don't think that that's what's going to take this offense necessarily to the next level or, you know, make them more elite. I just think that you want to have some good tight ends in terms of situational football, being able to respond and react to maybe what the defense is giving you. You know, in-game adjustment type things, but I don't think that it's like super huge critical that these tight ends be a Michael Mayer type tight end at the end of the day.
No, and I mean, Mike Denbrock's offense, you know, it wants to be a downfield offense, you know, push the ball downfield. And I feel like between Carr and Minchey, either of those guys can accomplish that. And also between those, you know, like those two guys coupled with the wide receivers that they have can definitely accomplish that. And so, like, does the tight end need to be a huge factor? No, because of all those things that you're just, you know, that you're saying. I think the most overlooked part about the tight end, like all anyone wants to talk about, is the pass catching. And it's great when they are, you know, able to pass catch and, you know, make plays and all that kind of good stuff. But at the same time, the blocking is still a huge part of being a tight end. And I agree. I think that's the most important part. But I also feel like what we saw the other day with what CJ Carr was doing with the tight ends, his ability to complete the passes to him, because, you know, like you were saying, you know, work the seams and do those different kind of things. Well, it's easier to do that when you have an offense that can stretch the ball downfield and you have a quarterback who is capable of connecting with those receivers downfield. And I talked yesterday about the fact that CJ Carr, of the three, is the one who had, you know, the most passes, who went you know, like the ball traveled in the air the farthest Saturday on the completions, you know, where the catch was made, and then whatever came after that. Steve Angeli was the guy who was mostly within 7 yards of the line of scrimmage, with the exception of the one ball that he completed that was 14 yards downfield. Minchey had a couple more, but obviously he was more inconsistent, only completing 43% of his passes. So my point is, feels to me like CJ Carr is the guy who is most capable of working all levels of the field. And so, you know, because of the threat between him and Greathouse and Faison and, you know, Fields, those, you know, between Carr and those receivers, I think that there's just going to end up being more opportunities with the tight ends, because that part of the field is going to be less congested. I mean, you know, you got a big body and the skill that a guy like Eli Raridan has, for example. I think there's going to be a lot of chances for him to catch the ball. So I guess, does it feel to you like CJ Carr is the guy who checks that box the most?
It depends on situationally. I think Steve Angeli would be someone who benefits greatly from tight ends because they like to run those drag routes over the middle of the field, and those are a very Steve Angeli route, that 5 to 10 yard kind of drag, check down kind of route towards your tight end. But if you're talking about more
like your use of air quotes on the check down.
But if you want to do, you know, more like dynamic downfield stuff, like you were saying, kind of use your wide receivers, especially someone like Faison, Great House, guys who have speed, in order to stretch the field vertically. Then it allows your tight ends to kind of sit in that middle of the field hole, over the ball, kind of middle of the field hole. And I think that's another great, option for a young quarterback, because the young quarterback, like CJ Carr, is going to go through his reads, and he's naturally going to want to press the ball down the field and make a play. But I think what a good security blanket is having that tight end kind of over the middle of the field. So if things aren't, completely opened up downfield, you can still push the ball downfield 5, 10, 15 yards and hit your tight end kind of sitting in a hole in the middle of the field. And I think that's where CJ Carr kind of got in trouble in that interception on Saturdays. He tried to kind of force that ball down the field between the cornerback and the safety. And had he had maybe a tight end just kind of sitting down in the middle, he wouldn't have felt the urge or need to kind of force that ball, and rather just kind of feed it down to his tight end. And so I think for someone like CJ Carr and this offense, as they're trying to press the ball downfield, expand the ball downfield, that tight end option is a good security valve for if things aren't open. It can really help take the stress off a young quarterback, where you can just find that tight end and hit them as they sit down in zone or man or whatever it might be. So
yeah, and I mean, the other aspect of that is, probably part of why he felt so bold on that particular pass that you're talking about that was intercepted is because the first pass that he threw, the one to Kevin Bauman on his first series of the game, he dropped to Kevin Bauman 15, 20 yards downfield between bracket coverage, pinned against the sideline, and, dropped it right where it needed to be. And then the next one to Jack Larson, he was covered as well, so he knows he can make those kind of throws. Good learning experience, because you go out and maybe you force it where you didn't need to force it, but the fact that he probably built up some confidence from knowing that he could do it, probably played into that as well. I am Tenzin, son of Ang, says, sounds like CJ's winning the Heisman next year after Drake, of course. He's winning 4 Heismans next year, man. I don't even know what you're talking about. We're going full Beano Cook on this thing. He's winning all 4 Heismans next year. That's how this thing is going to shake down. Don't you know by now? I mean, if we're going to get hyperbolic, let's just get hyperbolic. Let's just blow it up right here, right now. All right, well, we got a bit of a surprise when Billy Schrauth started at left guard and Anthonie Knapp started at left tackle Saturday with the first team offensive line. They've both been limited this spring, after the injuries that they had and off-season surgeries as well. So I asked Marcus Freeman kind of what their spring has looked like, but what kind of work they've been able to put in.
Yeah, it was a progression. Those two guys both were postseason or at the end of the season surgical guys that it was a progression for them to get back. We knew that at some point in the spring we were going to get them out there and get some work in. They played a lot of plays this season, and it was important to us get the physical strength conditioning aspect of the development for those guys before it was more important to do that than it was to just get them back in practice. So they got out there this week and competed and did some really good things. We limited their number just because it's early for them in spring, but it's good to see those guys out there, right? And we got a lot of good work for the young guys that have been practicing most of the spring, but it's a little bit different when you have Emil and Billy and Knapp and some of those guys in there with the ones. It's different for our offense.
I mean, it felt a lot different. There's still people with some concerns about it, I guess, but Emil Wagner was out there at right tackle. So they had potentially 4 of their top linemen playing on the line together with Knapp, Schrauth, Jagasaw, Wagner, and then they had Sullivan Absher in for Ashton Craig at center. Felt like a pretty good idea, didn't you think, considering they were auditioning the quarterbacks out there?
Yeah, I mean, you want true reps for your quarterbacks. You don't want the defense just bringing pressure and blowing plays up because you have a young and inexperienced offensive line out there. It's a disservice to the quarterbacks, but at the same time, you can't just tell the defense to take it easy because there's a young offensive line out there. So you kind of had to, find a way to be advantageous to both sides, to give a true look to the defense, and then also give the quarterbacks the time that they need to sit in the pocket, go through their reads and make a decision. But it's ultimately a fine line at the end of the day because these guys, are, some of your starters or quote unquote, number ones on the depth chart. And so, and guys that had or played late into the season last season had some nagging issues going on. And so, the last thing that you want is them to get re-injured or get injured even worse. But at the same time, you want them to be out there to give a true look on both sides of the ball, for the quarterback and for the defense. And so I thought Marcus Freeman and staff did a good job of, getting those guys integrated late into spring, allowing them to go out in the spring game and give, relatively good true looks so that these quarterbacks could be most fairly evaluated.
Going to be interesting also to see just exactly what that first team offensive line looks like on day one of training camp next summer. Like, what is Jagasaw still going to be the right guard? Is Anthonie Knapp still going to be the left tackle? I think a lot of people think that that's what it's going to look like, but I'll be really curious with Gerby Lambert now out for several months after tearing that shoulder labrum and having surgery on that a couple of weeks ago. Really curious to see exactly what that does look like. I think the biggest thing for Anthonie Knapp too is just like he just needs to keep getting bigger and stronger. So I'll also be really curious to see what kind of weight they're able to put on him, since he was at least able to get in the weight room to some extent. The lower body stuff obviously not nearly as much, because that's where his injury was, but he needs to keep getting bigger and stronger. That's I think the biggest thing that I need to see from him. All right, safeties. There's a lot of talent, a lot of depth at safety. In addition to Adon Schuler, Luke Talich, and Tay Johnson, they've all flashed this spring, and Freeman talked about some potential surprises maybe that he saw this spring at safety.
Surprise, but it's a group that I believe is deep and talented, just inexperienced in game reps, right? I know Luke Talich and what he can do, and Breontae Johnson and the talent he has. And Stroman, you obviously have seen it on film. You haven't seen it much in person with injury, but you have a room that's talented and can get the job done. They just don't have a whole bunch of in-game experience doing it here at Notre Dame. And so there's a strong confidence we have in that safeties room, and I'm looking forward to seeing those guys improve, but go do it when it matters the most.
All right, Jess, I have to ask you this first. Did you complete the assignment today?
Yes, I did. I had enough time.
Nice.
Just barely, but I did get it done.
It's too bad I haven't seen TD4ND in the chat today, because I think he would be excited if he knows what's coming. Because, okay, so in addition to Schuler, Talich, and Johnson, they've got Jadon Blair, Kennedy Urlacher, and they've got the Virginia Tech transfer Jalen Stroman coming in. So going to ask you about how they maximize the talent in that room, and we're going to do it with a little whiteboard.
Yeah, so
return to the whiteboard.
This is a little bit uncommon, but it's definitely something to kind of broach the idea of. If Marcus Freeman says that there's a lot of talent in the room, which there is, that they are pretty deep, at safety, and I think that there is a combination of some young talent, some intermediate talent, and some older talent. But unfortunately, there's only 2 safety spots on the field. And so, like Marcus Freeman was saying, like a lot of these guys don't have a ton of in-game reps or in-game kind of film to put on display. It's all, kind of hearsay about what the coaches tell you at practice. So, something that you can do in order to get another safety on the field is you can play a 3 safety look. This is definitely, more common in football since the introduction of RPO, run pass options schemes. But just to kind of give a breakdown of how a 3 safety defense is set up and what it might look like, you're going to have, 3 safeties back here. You're going to have 1 safety on the left hash, 1 safety on the right hash. So you have 2 safeties on the hashes. And then you have your 3rd safety playing basically kind of like a center field or a middle safety type option. And the reason
It was
why
basically Kyle Hamilton when he was a freshman, and he was out there with Alohi Gilman and Jalen Elliott a few years back.
Yeah, and you see this. I think the Arizona Cardinals did this a lot, kind of in the last 4 or 5 years, is going with, an undersized kind of safety to play a hybrid role of linebacker and safety, and that's ultimately what it is you're balanced against the run, you're balanced against the pass, and then ultimately you have an answer for an RPO type scheme, and the RPO puts slower linebackers in conflict. And so what do? You take that linebacker off the field and you replace them with a third safety. It allows the middle safety to play downhill faster. You can still remain multiple in coverage, meaning you could play cover 2, you could play cover 3, and you're not really tipping what you're going to be playing pre-snap. You can be multiple. And ultimately, this third safety is like a linebacker in run and then a safety in pass. So it's really, a hybrid type position. But the real true advantages of playing a third safety on the field is that you can get a faster player to the ball unblocked. It's easier to cover deep passes or those kind of post routes or in breaking routes towards the middle of the field. And then honestly, this thing can easily be morphed into a 3-3 or 3-4 type situation, right? And so this safety, for some reason, it's not letting me. Let me try to zoom out real quick. This safety could come down and be, another linebacker, and so now you've got a 3-4 look, or it can stay back in the middle of the field, and you've got 3 linebackers and 3 down linemen. So you're in your traditional kind of, 3-3 look. But to get into the nuts and bolts of how advantageous this middle safety can be is I think, first of all, you have to be going against an offense that's more of like a spread type offense or an RPO type offense.
Mm-hmm.
You're not just putting a third safety out there and forcing your defense to kind of, react or mold around whatever the offense is giving you. I think this is, this would be kind of game plan specific, a lot of, third and long, maybe RPO spread offense type looks. But in these type of offenses, zone run is, the big kind of scheme. And so offenses will use the zone run to put the defensive end in conflict. Usually this, defensive end right here, the backside defensive end, so that the running back, when they take this ball, you're putting them in conflict and potentially creating, a cutback lane here in the C gap. But with that middle safety or that third safety, he can now essentially come downfield unblocked and really provide support in that cutback or that C lane. So that's the first kind of advantage against the zone run. And then also, teams that use a 3 high safety look can ask their defensive ends to basically do a bend and chase technique. And what that means is you're bending around the corner, and then as soon as this ball is handed off to the running back, you're kind of chasing him down the line of scrimmage. And what's going to happen there is once the quarterback sees that this defensive end is bending and chasing, well, he can't give the ball. He's got to pull it and take it himself. Well, if he does pull that, he's likely going to follow off the butt, of his running back. But now, again, you've got a free safety being able to come down the field relatively unblocked and can make that play on the quarterback. So, in the RPO look, that's really good in terms of the run game. And now we can kind of get into the pass game a little bit here. In the RPO look, there's always someone there's an RPO or glance guy, or basically, as soon as the running or the quarterback is faking this handoff, he's glancing this way to his number one option. And 9 out of 10 times, it's going to be this hash wide receiver closest to the quarterback. And so as he's trying to work downfield or work this middle of the field on some sort of, there's multiple kind of glance routes that you could run here. But this safety has free reign to kind of jump any of those things right away. And so again, on an RPO look, you fake the handoff, the quarterback's glancing out to the wide receiver. This safety can ultimately just follow the eyes of the quarterback and go wherever this wide receiver goes. So it's basically a center fielder in the RPO scheme, really taking away that first level kind of pass, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then ultimately, you can still play quarters and cover 3 and not have to worry about the middle of the field being open. The middle safety provides coverage to the low hole and prevents teams from stealing first downs on those short throws. And so what I mean by that is, say you wanted to play, this is 3rd and long, right? Maybe 3rd and 10, 3rd and 15, and you want to play quarters look. So that means this corner is bailing out and playing a quarter. This corner is bailing out and playing a quarter. This corner is bailing out, playing a quarter. And this corner is bailing out and playing a quarter. But a lot of these spread RPO offenses, they got kind of savvy and tricky and said, you know what, if you want to bail out and play cover 4 in a traditional 2 safety look, that leaves this middle of the field wide open, right? So this guy, knowing that they're going to bail out, he just has to get behind the linebackers, but stay in front of these safeties that are bailing. And now the quarterback can get the ball out quick. And ultimately, you can get a 10, 15-yard chunk route. But if you play this 3 high safety look, this safety's just sitting there the whole time. So it's kind of like a robber look, right? Or again, just like a center fielder, free safety. He can roam this low hole, middle of the field, and take away those, short intermediate routes, but still allow your defense to play maximum coverage on the backside. So, when you look at Notre Dame's roster, who's a guy who could be someone that's stout and run, still has the ability to play freely in the pass, has the athleticism to play in the pass? To me, a name that first pops to mind is someone like Kennedy Urlacher.
Right.
So it's definitely an option. I don't know. I think, like you were saying, Kyle Hamilton might have been the last time they got into something like this, but that's a role and responsibility that you would hope Chris Ash would take on as being the new defensive coordinator, is providing some of that outside perspective, or some perspective of things that maybe Al Golden didn't think of or look at necessarily. And this, honestly, this concept is something more prevalent in the NFL just because of how heavy in the past these teams have become. You have to find a way to be more athletic on, 3rd and long, 2nd and long. And so this is often referred to as like a big nickel package, because you're overloading the safety at the end of the day. So that's my crash course on a 3 high safety look.
I like it. Makes a lot of sense. And, again, like the reason they were able in that season that I referenced, where Kyle Hamilton was playing that 3rd safety when they were playing with Elliott and Gilman, is because they had a Kyle Hamilton, like safety, especially back then, like that was probably the best, overall safety room they had in a long time. But you had, a unicorn like Kyle Hamilton as a true freshman. You had a transfer in Alohi Gilman, and obviously Elliott as well. But it was, the safeties were the strength as a group of the secondary. And again, like when you run through that list of all the safeties that they're going to have, and you look at the way that these guys have played, it feels, again, to your point, you're not just going to roll 3 safeties out there to say, well, we've got, all these safeties, so we're going to roll 3 safeties out there. It has to make sense. You're not going to do that, most likely against Navy, for example.
No.
You're going to do it against the schools, they're going to spread it out and more RPO looks and want to throw the ball downfield and the whole thing. So I think it's at the very least something that
I think
maybe
it could be a situational package.
Yeah, exactly. Or like you said, whether it's a dime package or whatever it happens to be.
So I think Garrett here in the chat makes a great point, if you don't mind bringing that onto the screen. Appreciate the comment. Might be the first time I've seen a comment from Garrett before, but he said trapping counter is the best way to attack a 3-3-5, and that's essentially what that is a 3-3-5. Also, this concept requires elite pass coverage, run fits from the linebackers. Yeah, it's like I don't disagree with that, and your defensive linemen and your linebackers have to be tremendous in their run fits. There's really no room for error. But what I would say is you're probably not running this defense out there unless it's a 85-90% passing down situation. Like I wouldn't expect them to go heavy in this look on like 1st and 10, 2nd and 10, where there's an option or a threat that they could get gashed by the run. Because trap and counter would be really good in these sort of situations because you're getting the defense to flow one direction and then you're kind of hitting them backside with limited numbers and hoping that a safety can come downhill and make a play in the run game. So, I think this is something that would be very situational, and it definitely wouldn't be a first down defense. It wouldn't be a base defense. It would probably be like a 2-minute drill type defense, or again, situationally 2nd and 15, 3rd and 10, 3rd and 15, just really long down situations where you want the ability to feel comfortable. You want the extra defender in the pass game, but you feel comfortable with that safety being able to help out in the run game if a run does happen, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Sure. Like you said, like a guy like Kennedy Urlacher would make sense. A guy like Luke Talmadge would probably make some sense as well, based on, like the way we saw him come downhill and hit in the blue gold game the other day. So again, a lot of very viable options in that room. And that's kind of why.
Well, and I think that has to be something that Chris Ash brings to the defense this year. Is they were really good at their base last season, playing man-to-man, good in run fits, and that sort of stuff, bringing pressures. But I think what Chris Ash has to bring to this defense is just kind of NFL-type nuances at the end of the day. Stuff from an outsider perspective where, maybe they get into a dogfight with a team like Ohio State and they don't have answers in terms of the passing game. They don't have answers in the secondary for elite wide receivers like Ohio State had in the national championship game. So what can you do to be different? And not only be different, but be highly efficient at it as well, because it's not enough just to go out there and run it and hope that it works. I think that's the part of Chris Ash's. They need to have different answers this season instead of maybe four. And again, they got to a national championship. This isn't me being critical, but I think you can be more responsive in certain situations rather than forcing your man-to-man defense to try to figure things out on the fly instead of having maybe more situational football going on out there.
That's why they practice more zone this spring.
Right.
It's to your point. That's exactly why they practice more sprint, more zone. But you do, like you've got a fresh eye coming in with Chris Ash and going, this defense was great. And I don't think he's going to try to reinvent the wheel by any means, but you do need to have some change-ups in there, to your point, like whether it's something like this, a 3 safety look, more zone, whatever it happens to be, like Josh is saying, he says, I think that they'll run a lot of nickel. That's why they got Devontae Smith, the defensive back from Alabama. They will. And I think Ash did say pretty much this spring that the way college football is played now, that it's definitely like the nickel package is almost the base package now. There are going to be some offenses that are going to operate a little bit differently. Obviously, again, like Navy being the extreme, but by and large, college football, the nickel package is the base package, and that's why you don't see quite as much, of the rover, with the exception of specific situations and those kind of things. So, they're definitely going to be, they were in nickel a lot last year. They'll continue to be in nickel a lot this year. All right, Jess, we've come to that time. Are you ready for rapid fire?
Let's do this thing.
All right. So I promised some quarterback talk for rapid fire, and that's where we're going to now is quarterback talk. You haven't had the chance to talk quarterbacks yet, so I'm going to ask you for your depth chart. What is Notre Dame's quarterback depth chart right now? Steve Angeli, CJ Carr, Kenny Minchey, 1 through 3. What's it look like? Go.
Yeah, number one is CJ Carr. I think he provides the most dynamic ability for this offense, involving all the playmakers, moving the ball down the field, and really becoming a total offense at the end of the day, providing a nice complement to an already elite running game, a rather elite, offensive line that's only going to continue to get better, because that was the main thing, is they just had a lot of inexperience, but they're going to continue to get, better and better. And so I think that this rushing offense needs a true complement, and that's an elite passing game. And I think CJ Carr gives you the most dynamic ability in the passing game. And I think what CJ Carr also has comparatively, he has natural instincts that are better than Minchey and Steve Angeli. And I think he has better feet and the ability to make plays off script, right? Like when Steve Angeli's making a play off script is throwing the ball out of bounds or making the right play in terms of just dumping the ball out. CJ Carr is more like Patrick Mahomes when he's making plays off script. He's still, pushing the ball downfield, trying to make dynamic, explosive plays. And that's probably going to come back to bite him at some point, but I would rather see that in a college offense led by Mike Denbrock and knowing how dynamic that he can be in an offense. I would much rather see that than kind of the conservative route of just dumping the ball out. So CJ Carr is definitely number one.
I was going to say, I really feel like you're spending an exorbitant amount of time defending your CJ Carr pick at number one. Like,
just got to give a lot of facts to start this thing.
You backed it up. I like it. Okay. So
number two,
CJ Carr, in case anyone missed it, is number one in Jesse's depth chart.
Number two would be Kenny Minchey. And the reason why I have to say Kenny Minchey is at this point in their career, here's where I'm at. Steve Angeli, Kenny Minchey, neck and neck. I just have to go with the guy who has more service time remaining. Kenny Minchey is younger. I think he provides more dynamic ability. And so if him and Angeli are this close, I just don't see any real advantage of rolling out Steve Angeli at the end of the day, because he's not a difference maker. Kenny Minchey can still be a difference maker. We saw him score that touchdown with his feet. We saw his ability to kind of move the pocket. I'll take that over what Steve Angeli can do at the end of the day. And so naturally that puts Steve Angeli at number three. And I don't want it to seem like this is, I hate Steve Angeli or whatever. I just need to go with what gives this offense the best chance of winning. And unfortunately, the guy who's just consistently, maybe doing the right play or getting the ball out 5 to 10 yards down the field with no real chance at making the playmaker type play, then I don't really necessarily care about it, because what's going to happen is this offensive line and running back room is going to naturally suck the defense in. They're going to get heavy towards the box. And what does that mean? You need a quarterback who can beat you downfield and man-to-man or make some more layered throws. And I just don't think Steve Angeli can do those things quite like CJ Carr can. And I don't know if it's just a mental block, like he just doesn't want to cut the ball loose, and CJ Carr has more or less regard and kind of more of that daredevil in him. But with how good this run game and offensive line are going to be and how crowded that box is going to get, they need someone who can legitimately push the ball downfield and make downfield plays. I think CJ Carr is the best option when you're considering those things.
I agree with that. I mean, Carr is, again, like Vince and I spent a lot of time talking about quarterbacks yesterday, but Carr is the number one between his pre-snap reads, his ability to process quickly, his ability to throw open receivers consistently, and just the way he goes through it all, the arm talent, his ability to really to have like the full control, full command of the offense. It is completely different than either of the other two. I mean, to me, that is more than obvious. It is a little bit, well, I definitely agree with your points about, Minchey is younger and there is more talent there. Like, how much should, like, a quarterback's ability to himself have pretty good command of the offense, to come in as a backup off the bench the way Angeli did last year, like in the Orange Bowl. How confident are you that Kenny Minchey, where he is right now, if he were thrown into a pinch, would be able to come in and do the same type thing that Steve Angeli did?
And I think that's
what makes it a little bit harder for me than maybe it is for some other people.
You could trust Steve Angeli to come in a high leverage situation and do a pretty solid job. I don't think you could say the same about Kenny Minchey at the end of the day. I think he would not be as cool and calm under pressure. Like, I don't think if they went through this whole season, I don't think Kenny Minchey could have produced a drive against Penn State like Steve Angeli did this past season, essentially. So, that's going to be ultimately the conversation is, do you want a guy who's more or less like your starting quarterback, or do you want a guy like who was our guy that has been Dak's backup that just went to Baltimore? Like, he can run the offense.
Yeah.
Cooper Rush. He's going to do a solid job, and he'll ultimately give you, maybe a chance to win, but he's not doing anything spectacular at the end of the day, right? He's running the offense how it's supposed to be run. I think that's what Steve Angeli I think of Steve Angeli as like a solid NFL backup quarterback at the end of the day. That would be his role on this team. Considering, worst case scenario, if the starter got hurt, you could go to Steve Angeli and he'd be pretty steady Eddie. He's not going to give you that amazing playmaking difference type of throw, but he's also probably not going to turn the ball over at the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean, you could win a lot of games with Steve Angeli at quarterback, but he's not going to lead you to a national championship. And I think that that's part of this as well. Like, between the three, Carr is definitely out front there. And with the, the upside and everything else that Minchey has, I think you have to put him at number 2 on this. Like, ultimately, like we've talked about, being a downfield offense and Carr's ability to do that much more consistently than either of the other two. If Steve Angeli is the quarterback, essentially 80 to 90% of your passes are all going to be within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. And you were talking about stacked boxes, and you're going to have stacked boxes. You're going to have guys jamming receivers at the line of scrimmage. You're never going to throw anything downfield. It's really, I'm not saying he's Drew Pine, but the offense is just going to look a little bit more like that, if Angeli were the guy in comparison. And I think that Kenny Minchey just gives you the ability to run a more open offense.
And so what was everyone's biggest complaint last season is that we could run the ball, but Riley Leonard can never push the ball downfield, and especially against those teams that were, bringing more players into the box. And we needed Riley Leonard to probably beat Ohio State more and man-to-man passes early on in the game. And so if you were those same people kind of criticizing where the passing game was last year and the lack of, the downfield playmaking ability and the deep ball and all of that kind of stuff, then CJ Carr should be your guy, because all Steve Angeli is Riley Leonard without the legs at the end of the day.
Right.
In terms of, like,
the running game, the running game is not going to be nearly as effective, obviously, as
right.
a result.
And so if you really think that Steve Angeli and Riley Leonard's passing abilities and how they're able to pass the ball downfield are super different, then you're just kind of mistaking yourself, because they have very similar passing skill sets and abilities. But what CJ Carr brings is that downfield dynamic playmaking ability. And I think that's just super crucial, knowing where Notre Dame is at in the running back room and the offensive line room.
Yeah,
Like they
with the kind of running backs they have, that's going to continue to open up the running game
right.
as well.
And so teams coming into this season, I am almost 100% can guarantee you they're going to err on having a heavier box and stopping the run game early and forcing Notre Dame's quarterbacks to move the ball downfield over their head.
Yeah.
And so if that's the type of play that is needed, CJ Carr gives you the best chance of running an offense to complete plays like that.
Good call, Josh, because Ian Book is the much more apt comparison. Like Steve Angeli is much more like Ian Book. You can win a lot of games with Steve Angeli, but ultimately you're not going to beat elite teams with Angeli as your starting quarterback. That's the difference to me. Like you can win probably, again, like 85-90% of your games with a guy like him that plays that game, but you're also going to have tighter games, more chances for upsets and all those different kind of things, because ultimately I think that everything would have to be perfect. Whereas if you have guys like CJ Carr and Kenny Minchey, not everything is going to have to be perfect for you to go out and win consistently with those guys at quarterback. So based on what we saw from the Notre Dame quarterbacks on Saturday, this is something that I still have seen come up over the last few days. Did it lend any validity to the idea of Steve Angeli being the starter at the start of the season, because you're going on the road, playing a couple tough teams to start off the season, and then transitioning into CJ Carr at some point?
No, it lends no further validity. And honestly, it's nonsense in my opinion. You can't, like seriously, like you need to put, if you're worried about CJ Carr performing in the big game and the big stage, then you would want him to do that against Miami rather than in a first round playoff game, a game 11 or game 12 where you need to win in order to get into the playoffs, or whatever it might be. There's more room for error in CJ Carr's game in game 1 of the season than there is in the first round of the playoffs, second round of the playoffs, etc. So I think you just gotta cut it loose and bite the bullet. And I'd rather do that early on in the season when there's less at stake, versus later on in the season when everything is at stake and when it's almost a win and go home type situation. And so CJ Carr needs that experience. You can't say, all right, we're going to start Steve game 1 and then start CJ Carr the rest of the season, and now it's round 1 of the playoffs, and he hasn't played in a meaningful, serious, competitive, high-leverage game because you decided to send him out against Miami. So that's where I'm at.
Start the best quarterback, period. That's what it comes down to. Angeli's not the best quarterback. CJ Carr is the best quarterback. And the idea that Angeli has all this experience and that would be a benefit because you're going on the road and that should matter, it's just completely overblown to me. And we've talked about it before. Angeli has one career start. So as soon as either CJ Carr or Kenny Minchey makes his first start, they'll have as many career starts, the exact same amount that Steve Angeli has right now. One start, that's it. The experience advantage Angeli has is relative. Like if I serve you a cup of coffee and you've never served anyone a cup of coffee, well, I've got an advantage over you in serving cups of coffee, right? That's why they use the term cup of coffee in baseball for a guy who's had a cup of coffee in the big leagues. He's been there, but what did it ultimately amount to? Wasn't much. He got something, but it was a cup of coffee. There was not much out of it. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Jameis Winston and Johnny Manziel were both redshirt freshmen when they won their Heisman trophies. And when they were red shirts, they played 0 because they didn't have the 4-game rule back then. Neither of them had taken a snap before they became the starter in the season in which they won Heisman trophies. They each won a Heisman trophy in their redshirt sophomore seasons. They started every game those seasons for Florida State and Texas A&M. So if you're good enough, you're good enough. And CJ Carr is good enough. So the experience factor, you've got to, for some reason, still start Steve Angeli. BS. Start the best guy, period. That's what it comes down to. So someone posted a comment at the end of the show last night about Tyler Buchner. I believe it was Brian and why. And we mentioned the possibility, that Buchner, maybe he goes back to the quarterback room if the Irish were to lose a couple quarterbacks in the transfer portal here, coming up in the next 10 days. And the comment that he made was Buchner is not a good quarterback, and he wouldn't want to see him at the position again, even if both Angeli and Minchey left. So my question to you, Jess, do you buy or sell that?
Yeah, I buy that. There's no reason that Tyler Buchner should move back to quarterback. First of all, he tried that and he wasn't highly effective. He wasn't a great college quarterback at the end
you
of the day.
You want a Gator Bowl though, right?
But and then to kind of go along with that, like he's not even in quarterback shape anymore. Like if you see his body, he's a lot skinnier. He doesn't have as much muscle on him. Like it would be a process to kind of get him back into quarterback shape. So it's just a big sell for me. There is no reason that he should be back in the quarterback room. I think ultimately I would prefer them to try to go into the portal and get an emergency quarterback before I'd move Tyler Buchner back over.
That would be first preference. Whether or not that happens, I don't know. Brian, I generally agree with what you're saying, but I also think, okay, so like if, and I'm saying if, I'm using my air quotes, but if you were to lose, both your number 2 and number 3 guys, let's say CJ Carr is sitting at the top of the depth chart and you lost both of these guys to the transfer portal, then you've got Blake Hebert as your backup, true freshman, right? I just don't think it would hurt to have a guy who has at least played the position in the room as an insurance policy. Like even if it's only in fall training camp, like taking some snaps as the number 3 guy to get some familiarity with the position, just in case, something happened down the line over the course of the season where you would need him. Because, again, like otherwise, I know you have Rizak in there and, look, I'm just being honest. Like Rizak looks like he at least has a fair grasp of the offense. We didn't see him running any plays out there in the blue gold Saturday. We've seen him throw the ball a little bit and his arm looks nothing like any of the other guys in the room, so there's a noticeable difference there. So like, I just feel like he is a potential insurance policy if it ever got to that point. But I do agree with what you're saying. I would want to try to go to the portal first. But again, like what you might be able to get in the spring transfer portal in terms of a guy who's going to come in pretty much knowing, like he's going to be the backup when he gets here. I think that could be a guy who's hard to find.
Let me put it like this. I would rather go to Justin Fisher than I would Tyler Buchner at quarterback.
Man, you were way down on Tyler Buchner. Justin Fisher is a little bit too bulked up right now to be able to throw the football.
Yeah, but I mean, it's the same situation. You'd have to put muscle on Tyler Buchner to get him back. So it's like either way, you're forcing someone to kind of, mold into something that they used to be or, are no longer. And so I think Justin Fisher would be more dynamic at quarterback than Tyler Buchner. And I think that Fisher has run a good amount of scout quarterback in the past as well. So it's like, I know he comes from the triple option, and so like, what threat would he actually have in terms of throwing the ball? But hey, we could run a triple option with this with the running backs in this room.
Why not, right?
I'm just like, that's how dramatic I'm trying to be. Of like,
okay.
I would rather have Fisher than I would.
I get you.
Buchner back there.
Yeah, love Justin Fisher, but I don't think that I would want him running it. But I get your like you saying, you're just trying to prove your point that you wouldn't want it to happen. I didn't realize you'd be so dead set against it.
It's just not him anymore. I just don't. I think he's past that. And then I don't think there's any reason to go, like that chapter in his life, his football career is closed and over. There's just no advantage for him, forcing him to kind of go back into that role. They tried it. He tried it at Alabama. And it was a failure.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. That's why he's back here as a walk-on receiver, obviously. So WNBA draft last night. Sonia Citron went 3rd overall to Washington. Maddie Westbeld went in the 2nd round to Chicago, and Leah Tu King in the 3rd round to the LA Sparks. Did anything surprise you? Anything jump out at you from those draft picks last night?
Yeah, I think Sony is going to be the most interesting. The Mystics had 3 picks in the top 6. They're very clearly remaking their roster. And I think Sony's a really good fit because she has a wide-ranging skill set for a team that's trying to rebuild their roster, right? She can play multiple positions. She can be used as a perimeter shooter. She can facilitate the ball. She's really good on defense. So I think she really fits in for a team that's trying to remake the lineup. And I think she's going to be just really good in that role at the end of the day. And I think, Maddie Westbelt going in the 2nd round, going to Chicago, I think the first thing that came to mind is good luck playing with Angel Reese in Chicago. That'd be my first and foremost concern for Maddie Westbelt.
Haley Van Lith there too. So.
Yeah, and so the Sky focused on offense with their first 2 picks before they got to Maddie. They drafted Svidka and Van Lith. Both are guards. And Westbelt is more of that, pick and pop kind of power forward, but she also does a lot of the little things. She's a good screener, solid defensive rebounder, good positional player on defense. Maddie Westbelt's not going to be a day 1 starter. She's going to come off the bench, and she's going to provide good looks, especially on defense and in the pick and roll, being that kind of stretch power forward for them.
I was going to say, getting back to her natural position, more stretch power forward type player than, where she played this year, I think is going to help her out quite a bit. And I think it's going to be really interesting because, like you said, with what Chicago drafted ahead of her and kind of where they are, she could be on the bubble in terms of making a roster. It gets really hard to make rosters. 2nd round and 3rd round picks are not guaranteed anything, so it's going to be some work, but I'm sure she's going to get into training camp and make a go at it. And I feel like her getting back to that natural 4 position is going to help her out quite a bit.
Yeah. And then kind of, the last one there being Leah Tu King. Obviously, we only got 1 season of her, but if you ask me, I thought she was the most important player on that team, and I think she ultimately was kind of the glue player, considering what was going on between the lack of production at the center, maybe some of the drama that was going on at the guard position. I thought her role was really huge as being that glue player. But her biggest thing in the WNBA is going to be her willingness to attack the defensive glass. And really just trying to play as big as possible for someone who's only 6 foot and probably considered a small forward in the WNBA. And you talked about, players who might be on the fringe of making a roster. I think Leah Tu King is really going to be on the fringe of making a roster, but she has to exude tremendous effort on defense. And again, a willingness just to eat glass 24/7, like Kawhi Leonard said, board man gets paid. That's how Leah Tu King is going to make this roster. If she can just continue to just be as close to a double-double player as possible in the WNBA. And that's when she was her most efficient at Notre Dame.
Yeah, because, even if it doesn't translate into a true double-double in the WNBA, because players are going to be a little bit bigger, she just has a knack for the ball. And, so even if it's 8 and 8, I think that she can definitely, just like the work ethic she has, the positioning she has, her nose, for the ball and all those different things can definitely help a team. Like the Sony thing, I thought was, like Christopher is saying, the Mystic are going to be hard to deal with. They got Kiki Iriafen, they got Citron, and then they also got Georgia Amore, who's at Kentucky now. She followed Kenny Brooks from Virginia Tech to Kentucky. She was the point guard at Virginia Tech on their Final Four team a couple of years ago, and then went down to Kentucky this year. And did you see the interview with her afterwards? She's like, she's from Australia, and she's like, I always wanted to play with Sony, It's like, so I think that's pretty cool to hear her say that, because they played against each other for so long in the ACC, and to hear her say that, and like just the sheer talent that Washington got in the first round with those three players, like they had that cluster of, out of 4 picks, they 4 draft picks overall, they had those 3 players that they were able to pick up. So I agree. I think that they're going to be a real contender here in a few years with the talent that they added, starting with Sony last night. So good for them. There's going to be some other play. I thought it was really interesting, and I don't know how closely you paid attention, but like the Golden State Valkyries are an expansion team, and they went with a European player right off the bat.
That's bold.
That feels like a swing and a miss for me, because like you want to try to, like get the attention of your fan base, like a face of the franchise type player with, your very first round pick. It felt like a miss. I mean, I don't know what this player is going to be, but there are like so many really star American type players who I think that you could have, come in and really marketed yourself around. I just feel like it's going to be harder to do that, bringing in a European player like that.
Yeah, I guess you just blame Olivia Miles at the end of the day, because she was supposed to be number 2.
She would have been one of those, right? All right. According to sports media reporter Andrew Marchand of The Athletic, Fox Sports made an all-out effort to get Reese Davis away from ESPN's College Game Day to become the host of Big Noon Kickoff on Fox, and also be one of the faces of its networks. But Reese Davis said no, turned it down. He took a raise from ESPN instead, even though he's not making as much apparently as what the offer from Fox would have been. But he would have replaced current host Rob Stone on Big Noon Kickoff. So good move, bad move. I can't even say it, for Reese Davis.
Yeah, so I'm probably going to make a lot of people mad with, what I'm about to say, but I think Reese Davis is a better fit for ESPN. I prefer ESPN's College Game Day over Fox's Big Noon Football. I think Reese Davis obviously has good chemistry and rapport with, Kirk Herbstreit and the various other personalities on the ESPN show. It's kind of coming back to comfortability at the end of the day, right? Like if you go on to Fox, now you got to reestablish relationships, kind of reestablish your role on that show, feel like you're not stepping on people's toes. Like all those things are already solved on ESPN, and I prefer the ESPN show, and I enjoy Reese Davis at the end of the day. And so when I think of College Game Day, I think of Reese Davis. And I think it just would have been weird seeing him do the Fox show at the end of the day.
I think he would have brought a lot more credibility and a lot different feel to that Big Noon Kickoff
for sure
show. And I think that that's obviously why Fox.
Well, one would get better and the other one would get worse, right?
Yeah,
and so
exactly.
It's like if you're ESPN, you're trying to keep the guy that makes your show good. And if you're Fox, you're trying to take away that guy so your show could be better at the end of the day.
I think it's a good move too. I mean, he's been at ESPN for something like 3 decades or something like that now. And he's also got a lot of, got a lot of rapport with the guys that he's worked with. He's worked with everybody, but Saban and McAfee for like at least 10 years now at this point. Saban was his first year last year. McAfee's been around for a couple of years. So I think it's good for him and it's good for ESPN as well. And like I don't watch a lot of those shows because typically what happens is I'm either doing something in the morning while that show is going on, before we've got a Notre Dame game going on, or I miss that show because I'm going over to the stadium, to do a Notre Dame game. But when I watch them, that's the one that I'm going to watch 90% of the time because people still talk more about what's going on game day. And again, I think that that's why Fox wanted to make a move like that, because it really would have given them, a good leg up by essentially having a point guard who can go out and distribute at a high level like Reese Davis. How are you feeling though if you're Rob Stone on Fox, knowing that Fox was out trying to bring in a big gun like Reese Davis?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm Rob Stone, I'm kind of feeling like an idiot because my boss was actively looking for someone to replace me. And when they said no, they just probably going to act like nothing happened at the end of the day, right? Like Rob Stone had to hear about it. And it's not a great feeling to know that you are being basically you're doing a good enough job, but they don't feel like you're doing a great enough job to make you that like to separate yourself or to give you the leg up on your competition. And so that would be a crappy feeling if I'm Rob Stone. Like I'm good enough, but you don't view me as great, and you actively tried to replace me, and now I'm just supposed to sit here and act like nothing happened because that plan fell through.
Keep looking over your shoulder. That's right. I mean, I don't know who else they could go out to and try to get at this point, because obviously there aren't too many people, that fill those seats. And I agree with Brian NY. Rob Stone is good too.
Oh, he's good.
He's just not at Reese Davis's level. And I think part of it is because Reese Davis has just done it for so long. Like Reese Davis is good, but part of that is because of the reps that he's put in. He's been doing it for a long time, and he's done a lot of different things at ESPN. Stone is good. He's just not, just like the quarterback position, right? Like they can all be good, but someone's got to sit at the top of the heap. And I think that Stone is just a notch or two behind Reese Davis, which again is why, Fox wanted to get Davis.
I think there's two good comments in the chat right now. Swan Dong makes one of them. Fox needs to get Pat. I think Pat leading that Fox crew would probably be a relatively good idea. You'd lose credibility at the end of the day, because I think Rob Stone is more professional and credible than Pat. But if you're really trying to bring, something new and new energy and enthusiasm, Pat would be a good option. And then I think Brian NY also makes a good point. It's not Stone, it's the other guys around him ultimately. And that's the big thing that Reese Davis would have to do, is he'd have to pick up the pieces or elevate the pieces around him more. And I think that's ultimately, probably what's going on is Rob Stone has maybe maxed out his, ceiling in terms of kind of elevating the people around him. And it's like, well, what are you supposed to do when you got Urban Meyer sitting next to you, and Charles Woodson and Brady Quinn I'm cool with for obvious reasons.
Yeah, but you got
Reggie Bush is still out there,
Alabama Heisman winner.
Ingram,
Mark Ingram, and that's like as much as you might not be in on Desmond Howard. I think that, there's a drop from Desmond Howard to Mark Ingram as well.
I'd take Desmond Howard over Mark Ingram. I'd take Nick Saban over Urban Meyer.
Yeah.
I'd take Kirk Herbstreit over Brady Quinn.
Ooh, would you? Sure.
Just he's around the game more, he's more submersed into the game. I think too. Like, I'm not trying to take anything away from Brady Quinn, but that's always been Kirk Herbstreit's job. Brady Quinn was a player, and then he became an analyst. Kirk Herbstreit's always been an analyst, and whether you like him or not, I think he does a good job.
Fox needs another personality on that show, beyond Quinn. Like Stone, Quinn, those would be the only two surefire keepers for me.
Yeah.
And other than that, I think there's a lot of work that they could do. Who would probably be good for them would be a guy like RG3, honestly. ESPN let RG3 go, and I feel like he could be someone, he was doing a lot of college football coverage for you. I feel like he's someone who could
he's corny, but I would take him over Mark Ingram at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think that's probably ultimately, what kind of led to, a pretty quick departure for RG3 is sometimes he does get a little bit too corny, like it's a little bit too much at some points, at some point you also do have to have a critical eye towards things. And I don't think that he always, does a great job of doing that. But again, I think that, there are enough other unique personalities in the TV game. And I think that you could do a lot worse than RG3, quite honestly. All right. So another move, CBS, again, according to Marchand, tried to hire Dan Orlovsky away from ESPN to be in its number one college football game analyst to replace the retiring Gary Danielson. But instead, Charles Davis is going to replace Danielson because Orlovsky is still at ESPN. What do you think of that decision by Orlovsky? You in or out? Like, did he make the right move there?
This is tough because I'm battling the line of what was maybe best for Dan Orlovsky and what was maybe best for my perception of Dan Orlovsky at the end of the day. I think Dan Orlovsky is way better of a college analyst than he is an NFL analyst at the end of the day.
Me
And
too.
I actually don't mind him as a college analyst because I think he provides a good amount of detail. He doesn't over-explain things. He makes things relatable to the everyday fan. And so I thought he would have really thrived in that role because of how good he is in the college game. And I like listening to him do college games as well. And so me personally, I think it's a bad move because I think he would have excelled more in this role. But for Dan himself, I'm sure that he would have told you he wanted more of that everyday role of being in the NFL analyst role.
Having his hands a little bit of everywhere.
He doesn't want to be in a singular lane of college football.
Yeah.
He wants to have his ability to, like you were saying, have his hands in a little bit of everything. But I think he would have done a tremendous job if he solely would have just focused on college football and that be his kind of everyday job.
I feel like he could have really raised his profile and carved a big niche by making a move like this and becoming the number one, and potentially opened himself up more opportunities down the road, like to potentially transfer, like into an NFL, type, game day booth as well with CBS, because obviously they carry both college football and the NFL. I feel like he sort of pigeonholed himself a little bit at ESPN and limited himself, because I've heard some interviews with him in the past, and this goes back to even before ESPN hired Buck and Aikman to do Monday Night Football, when he was like, he's been that number two Monday Night Football booth the last few years, and I had heard him say that essentially he wants to be the number one guy, regardless of like whatever the biggest thing they have is, like he wants to be part of that. Well, as long as Buck and Aikman are at ESPN, I mean, you're talking about at least a decade down the road, probably, before that happens. So, like, if he wants to be the guy who is, broadcasting games and doing that kind of stuff, it really feels like this was a golden opportunity for him, like to get in there, be the number one college football analyst on a network, and, again, potentially open up some doors down the road to maybe he's doing a college game on Saturday and an NFL game on Sunday. Like it felt like that could have been a thing for him. But, I know you're not really high on him, like on NFL Live and stuff like that. But again, like when you talk about the chemistry of the crew, like he and Rutledge and some of the other people who do that show, I feel like they've got pretty good chemistry and he does a solid enough job. But it just feels like, again, there could have been more for him out there potentially.
I just enjoy him so much more as a game day analyst than I do as an everyday analyst, because I think what happens is as a game day analyst, you can get in your lane and he can just crunch film and focus and tell you what these guys are good at.
These games week in and week out. Yeah,
exactly.
He's been good in the booth. Like the times that he's done some Notre Dame games, I thought he's done a really good job.
But when he does this everyday analyst thing, it just gets, and I don't mean this in a rude way, but it just gets dry because you're trying to come up with new kind of spins every day.
Yeah.
And the way this is not just singular to Dan Orlovsky, and this is the grind of having to do something every day on ESPN. You just find ways to kind of say things differently and it becomes controversial. And I think he's just not as subjective of an analyst as he is when he does college football games, right? For some reason, I just think his analysis is more fair and on point in the college game when he's doing games than vice versa when he's kind of zoomed out and looking at bigger picture of all the other things that are going on in the NFL world. Maybe I'm wrong and a little bit confusing, but that's just kind of the way I look at it.
No, I can see that. Mark makes a good point, and I was thinking about this as well. Like, Orlovsky is from Connecticut. He obviously played for the University of Connecticut, and ESPN is in Bristol, so maybe there's a comfort level, with that as well. The fact that he's got young kids and everything is right there. He's living in his home state, and if that's the case, then that's obviously great for him. Where he gets to be close to his family and stuff like that. But the other side of it is, if you're doing games and that's your main job, you're only gone a couple days a week, so you can still be home quite
could
a
just
bit.
sit at home and get a home theater and just crunch film all day.
Yeah. And it's not like CBS is like ESPN where they've got daily shows and that kind of stuff. So the job is a lot different from that aspect. Fill in the blank. It's blank that the Hard Knocks offseason edition with the New York Giants has been nominated for a sports Emmy.
To me, it's just kind of surprising at the end of the day because, I feel like there's been better Hard Knocks seasons in the past, but I think that this whole drama with Saquon Barkley and the actual cuts of the GM is what made this kind of get nominated.
I think it's got to be
for an Emmy, right? And so to me, it's kind of funny at the end of the day because the Giants are just getting kind of this Emmy for, again, to me, it's like recognition for the fact that they messed up the Saquon Barkley thing all over again, because that's the reason why they're getting the Emmy nod, in my opinion.
That's the irony of this whole thing. I think it's got to be as well because, like, you cut all that stuff on film and you put it on TV. So
that's what the whole season was about.
Yeah, and that's all anybody is still talking about. And the fact that Hard Knocks has been around forever, and it's not just any Hard Knocks, it's specifically this Hard Knocks that had that happen. And because that happened, that's probably the reason you're nominated for an Emmy. But oh, by the way, it's also the reason that no NFL team is ever going to do an off-season edition with you, because they don't want to have that kind of stuff blow up in their face and happen to them. They had to go to North Carolina to try to get Bill Belichick to do a show, and then that blew up. So it's very ironic that this is what ends up getting nominated, considering we'll probably never see this edition of Hard Knocks again.
Let me ask you a question. Do the Eagles win the Super Bowl without Saquon Barkley?
No. No hesitation. No. No way.
Does Saquon Barkley set the single season rushing record, or almost, with any other team besides the Eagles?
Mm-hmm. He might have in San Francisco.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But do you kind of get what I'm getting at here? It's like it was just so dramatic that this blew up in the Giants' face, and then literally that guy goes on and is a huge reason why they win the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And that's why this is getting a daytime Emmy, because there's just, or not daytime Emmy, but I said daytime Emmy because there's just so much drama baked into this thing. And that's the reason why it's getting the Emmy nod, is because of the drama that's baked into it. And then what Saquon Barkley was able to accomplish post breakup.
That's exactly it. That's it. Like, I think that how much did the fact that because of what they caught on film with Saquon and the Eagles went on to win the Super Bowl with Saquon Barkley, like how much did all of that play into it? Like the fact that they're getting this nomination. They'll probably end up winning the frickin' Emmy for it. All right, well, that's going to do it for today's show. Appreciate you, as always, being here. A lot of great stuff in the chat. Tonight, we will be back tomorrow. Of course, we've got our mailbag day coming up on Wednesday. So get your questions ready for tomorrow's show. And rumor has it, we're even bringing We In, We Out back later this week. So looking forward to that. Jesse, great whiteboard earlier tonight. Hit the like button before you leave, and we will talk to you tomorrow. Aviation Sports Talk.